We're really excited you could join us. I'm Sveta McShane. I'm your moderator for today. For those of you who are new to Singularity University and this is your first time joining us, our mission is to educate, inspire, and empower leaders to apply exponential technologies to address humanity's grand challenges. We do this through both in-person programs and digital programs, projects, and events all around the world. With these webcasts, we're bringing you experts from the XU community directly to you to present on a variety of topics across all of SU's many domains. Some of our upcoming topics include building resilient cities and the future of robotic surgery. So I want to take a moment really quickly to show you guys around Livestorm. If you're new, there's a couple of tabs to your right. You'll see the chat section. I see everyone saying hello already from Brazil. Lots of Brazil, actually. Australia, Texas, awesome. If you guys have a question for Robert during the session, please drop it in the question section. I will be monitoring that. And please also upvote your favorite questions so I know which ones you guys are really excited for me to ask Robert towards the end. So today our session is going to focus on the power of science fiction as a predictive tool to inspire and activate your design process. This session is also going to be a little bit different than some of our previous sessions. Robert will be walking you through this science fiction design framework that his team has been using. And this process includes a set of worksheets. So we're actually going to give you guys the link to the worksheets today so you can go through this process on your own. Probably in about a month or so in mid-November, we're going to bring Robert back for a second session. And if you take the time to fill out these worksheets, please send them to us. We're going to choose 1 to 3 people concepts that you guys send to us, and we're going to bring you up on stage the way that I am now to actually workshop your ideas with Robert. So this is something that I'm really excited about. I'm super stoked that Robert has agreed to do this, and definitely send us your ideas because I think this will be really, really fun. So let me tell you a little bit more about our guest, Robert. He is the Managing Director of Innovation and Design for SU Labs, where he provides design and innovation direction for corporate, startup, and field impact teams. Robert is constantly investigating human behavior, nature strategies, and emerging technology to find new opportunities for design and innovation that drive positive impact for the world. Robert strives for solutions that integrate social, environmental, and educational considerations while proving that purpose and profit can combine for the greatest impact. So we're super excited to have him today. I think this is going to be a really fun session. So now I'm going to hand it over to Robert. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you, Sveta and team, and thank you, everyone. This is so much fun to be able to do this to a larger audience. We do this all the time to smaller groups, and I think this is just going to be fun, and you tell me if it is. I'm just going to jump into it. You see we have science fiction design intelligence. That's what we're really calling this method that we've developed over the last 2 years. And there's me, there's Twitter, and su.org. If you don't, there it is. A little bit of background and context on how I got to what we're doing today. I started industrial design at Carnegie Mellon, pretty classic, love of technology and love of the arts leads to design type of programs, and that was a great place for that. Somewhere along the way, I, always searching for new inspiration and new ways to inspire yourself and others and find new solutions. Our planet is a great place to start. Biomimicry is the practice of learning from nature's strategies and translating that to solve the challenges that we face or in some ways have created for our planet. And I got my master's through ASU, Arizona State here in the States, and Biomimicry Institute. Much of my career had been spent at IDEO. It's a global design firm responsible for anything from the first computer mouse to new ways for Los Angeles to cast its vote. So very broad global design firm, a lot of great experiences in that place. And when I left there after about 10 years, not because of the culture, the work that we're doing, but it's really that there were new ways to get things to market. And this came about through the methods of startups. So I saw all these startups getting products into the hands of people. And you decided to join the founding team of Level Money. It's a financial services app and platform really catered to help people simply spend less than they make, which may sound simple, but it's really tough, especially in our country. We're coming off of policy and legislation that made it difficult for young people to have decent credit. Therefore, they were getting terrible loans. The big banks didn't have the best interests of many of the 18 to 35-year-olds in mind. So we developed a service platform, and over a number of years had left that and exited. It was acquired by a large organization. In the meantime, I live up in the mountains. We started a nonprofit makerspace, and right now I'm co-founder of a startup called Stomp Sessions, and we're focused on digitizing skill progression. We're starting in action sports. So we're doing everything we can and using technology and human power to help people get better at what they love to do. And really, I focus so much of my energy and love here at Singularity University. I joined here about 3 years ago as one of my former clients from IDEO said, "We're starting labs. Wouldn't you love to join?" I said, "Absolutely, you're doing exactly what I want to do." Labs, if it's simplified, is as Sveta said, we try to find the large organizations that can help get impact to scale. We have a number of startups that we're kind of incubating and accelerating, and then our impact partners, right? People who really understand the true needs of people and planet. And every time we try to get those three things together, we try to find that sweet spot and launch new initiatives out of that spot. Something that happened when we got here, and if you know SU a little bit, we really bank on these exponential technologies. And my process to this point in my career have been focused on maybe a year or two out, maybe 5 years out. You get to SU and you start to realize that future's coming a lot faster, right? So the question to me and the team here was, how do we design for a future that, the technology is deceptive now, it's going to be disruptive. How do you design for that future, that exponential future, when it's very difficult to predict? Harder than ever to predict where the future is headed. That was a challenge when I got here. We looked at science fiction, right? Science fiction has always been a great way to predict the future. And, how do we imagine possible futures and make them real? And it's a very future-back approach. So what we'll do together, and we'll talk about this method, helps you cast a vision for the possible future, and then step back. Track back to today to kind of figure out the necessary next steps. What do I need to do today to get to 2030, the 2030 that we believe should exist? But we'll take a little bit of time, and I have this up now. I'm on the platform. Maybe a show of hands, or give me some love for anyone who loves science fiction. There we go. Thank you, Alan and Hector. So this is something that just, as little kids into our adulthood, science fiction inspires. It absolutely does. Movies, books, comic books especially, right? So what's fun, let's just think a little bit back to what science fiction has done for us already. If any of you, I was raised on Star Trek, Bones. Star Trek gave us this technology that could scan a body and find the biological signals and test the health of somebody, right? On the other side of the screen is a company called Scanadu. They're racing for this X Prize. They were working in the building I'm sitting in right now, was their offices. There's an X Prize launched for $10 million prize for anyone who could achieve this tricorder goal. They didn't win, unfortunately, but Dexter did. Dexter was awarded $2.6 million to continue the research and development of this technology, this tricorder technology, enabling a non-medical professional to scan the body and get biosignals. Tricorder. I'm sure many of you recall this, Minority Report, the gestural interactions made so famous by Tom Cruise's dramatic motions. Well, that's led to so many interactions from that time. Anything that you see you're doing on an iPhone, you can kind of think about how that relates, but I'm really interested in this. And if anyone's familiar with this, maybe share online, but this is Project Soli, and Soli is going to enable us to control physical hardware devices by manipulating the air around it. Using radar technology and everything else, this is going to start to bring the reality from the movies and books that we've read into our world. And what I love about this is not a concept video, it's not a Kickstarter campaign. It is a chip being developed by Google with the intentions of putting this in hardware around the world so we can change the way we work with devices. If anyone's familiar with Star Trek Next Generation, the thing called the holodeck was a room in a technology where anyone could go in and create a new space. Picard would go in and say, give me a Western saloon, and he'd have a drink of whiskey. Well, we work with our fine friends at Lowe's Innovation Labs. They took direct inspiration from the holodeck to address a very, very real consumer need. Lowe's is, for those not in this country, Lowe's is a very large hardware and home improvement store, like Home Depot or versions of that in other countries. And their customers were coming in, they would pick out an appliance or a fixture and try to imagine what it would look like in their homes. Then they'd buy it, install it, look at it, and then regret. Because it just didn't look right, didn't feel right once they got it in there. That was a problem for them, it was a problem for Lowe's and everyone else. So what the Holo Room does, it's a room, they built it first with an iPad where you could go in and place that appliance in your kitchen and see what it looks like on the iPad, hold it up and scan it around. They've since then evolved it to HoloLens, which is Microsoft's AR, augmented reality technology. So you can go in, picture this new stove in your kitchen, and make a decision based on that information. If some of you recall, a few years ago, Big Hero 6, this is Baymax, a very cute and wonderful soft robot. Just up the street from us, a company called Nubotics is using air and soft material to control and manipulate physicality. Right, so I put this on, you can go up there and try it out. You put it on your arm, strap it in, and they start to control the pressure around your body, and they basically supercharge you. Right, so robots aren't looking like they used to, right? They're soft, they're pliable, and potentially very safe. For those of you who recall that crazy movie in the 70s called Logan's Run, I'll play this very short video. So I don't know how familiar you are with this, but essentially, back in the 70s, they gave us Tinder in a movie, right? So you can see how science fiction leads to real-life solutions. Don't know if this is a direct relationship, but I thought my friends thought that was an interesting one. But what's really compelling, and lastly, looking backward, 1888, Edward Bellamy wrote this incredible book, and he created a world where there was universal credit, where people could walk around and exchange goods and services without physically trading currency, money, or anything else. Right? So in 1888, he created the credit card in his book a good 60 years before Visa or MasterCard ever thought about this. But perhaps the most impressive example of the predictive power of storytelling, for me, is the 1939 World's Fair. At that time in America, we were living in dense urban centers or very rural farms. There was really nothing in between. In 1939, New York had invited the best and brightest and greatest from corporate America to come show off their talents. To many, that might sound like a contradiction in terms, but to General Motors, that came in the form of Norman Belgettis. Belgettis was he was a 46-year-old industrial designer and also a theater designer. He was charged of creating their pavilion at the World's Fair called Futurama. Futurama created an incredible landscape of a new America with ribbons of highways connecting cities and smaller towns, grassy rolling hills, fresh air, and clean water. And guests could walk through this and see what the future could hold. Essentially, Belgetti's vision for the future became the future. You'll see here, you might notice, 1939, self-driving car. Finally, we're seeing these things on the streets of Mountain View and other places. To that point, Belgetti's and others got a lot of things right. Certainly the technology, now that we're seeing self-driving cars, the freeways, they convinced American taxpayers and the government to create this ribbon, this network of streets in creating the suburbs that we know today. But certain things, I would argue, they didn't quite get right. If this is familiar to anyone, this is traffic. It's what we experience here every day in Silicon Valley and all over the country. And I've been to many Europe countries, and we know what this feels like. They didn't predict all that mass movement and those freeways turning into this. They also didn't predict what would happen when you start to take the culture out of these cities. This is a photo from Detroit, right? People get to move out of the cities into the suburbs. What happens to the cities? And then what happens to the suburbs? So much sameness that we see nowadays. So when we use science fiction, design intelligence, we say we always go steep. And by steep, I mean the societal, technological, environmental, economic, and political variables of the futures that we need to create. These are things that are very important to start to create the pillars for these future worlds that we want to see exist. When we do this here, we tend to get in the concept world. We like the storyboard. I'm going to encourage everyone to take their hand at that. We generate ideas out of this process, and the intention is to get them out in the world, share them with the world, so that we can see them come to fruition in some way or the other. We focus on very different activities. This is some of our work on the future of home. But what I want to do today is walk you through the 6 steps for Sci-Fi DI. And hopefully you have the worksheets, and they're going to walk you through it when I'm not here, right? But we'll go through this together, and maybe we'll start the first one because we will have a little bit of time. And then as you work on the other steps yourself, send the concepts, and then at some point we'll pick a few that we can get to retrocast together. So I just want to walk through the steps so we know what we're doing. And we have to start with a framing and in some sense a reframing. Like, what's the challenge that we really want to focus on? We focus on a number of things with a number of different companies. Here are just a few, just to give you an idea of the future of. And let's think about maybe 2030. It's a good 12 years out. And that gives us, it's further out. It's so far that we have to stretch, but it's not too far that we can't think of great solutions. Future of home, very important. Future of work, probably one of the biggest things that we're asked about here at SU. So what is the future of work? What's the future of work for me, my employees, my family? Future of play, we've done pleasure, we've done everything. So I encourage you in this step, and maybe we'll do this together, is to think about your future of and frame up your challenge. The second step is the steep, and we talked about this before. And this is where you start to create those big pillars, those variables, those assumptions that you make in the world that you're building, in your science fiction world for the future. Right here they are: societal, technological, environmental, economic, and political. Again, the worksheets, we gave you examples. And one thing that I always like to think about as an example, if we were to say in 2030, energy is near free or near free, because what we understand and what we know is that so much energy hits the earth. On one day, if we learn to capture and store that, we could power ourselves for a year. So if we learn as a society how to capture energy better, energy could become free. Well, that's a great statement. If I say that is one of the variables that I want to put in this future, then what? It starts to pull on other strings. We have wars over energy, right? Pure economies are based on energy exchange. Businesses don't want energy to be free, but food becomes a lot cheaper. Food production, cleaning water, cleaning our air, all those things, if energy is free, become a very real reality. So when you go through this part of the, step 2, think about those things and do your research and write your own pillars. If it's not something in the worksheet, create something on your own. Step 3 is about character development. And maybe some of us are used to writing personas, but when we do character development for science fiction, it's someone you want to read about, someone you want to see in a movie, or a star of your favorite comic book. We'll create characters. The 4th step is world building. You can think about this as storyboarding, right? What is the story arc that your character goes through in this world that you've created to solve the challenge that you've framed up? And then the 5th step is concept generation. And for some reason, we start to create these worlds. We create a character that's overcoming a challenge. And what ends up is a number of concepts or ideas drop out, right? So I'm going to ask you to pick some of the key concepts out of your story and start to build them out and really think through what kind of technology do you need to enable that. What are the use cases? What challenges is it solving? What kind of partners would be needed to put this in place? Maybe what kind of funding would be required to make this a reality? There's some of the examples of how we start to think about these things for exoskeletons. Here's also some examples of what non-illustrators do with their work. And this is what I encourage everyone to be visual, stick figures, do a lot of work. The final and probably most important step in many ways is to retrocast. And as I spoke before, this is a future back approach to design. So we've gone through those steps. There's this big idea for 2030. But what's most interesting is how do you then cast back? If this is a concept in 2030, what needs to happen in 2028 or 2025 for that to be a reality? Technically, politically, socially, what needs to be in place for that thing to happen? And then back from 2025, get to 2020, what needs to be in place for that, for 5 years later, for it to be in progress. And then that takes you to now. It's 2018, and that is now, right? It's 2 months from now. So this retrocasting is a very valuable and important process to get from a vision of the future, possible future, back to reality. Those are the 6 steps. And as Yoda always says, do or do not, there's no try. So if we're ready, I'm going to bring up my screen, and we will walk through some of these steps. Does everyone have, or do most of you have the worksheets? Excellent. Thank you all. I love the feedback. And the first sheet's pretty simple or very complex, right? The future of, what's the challenge that you want to address? You want to create this story about the future, the science fiction. What's the future of? Now that I know you have the worksheets, I'd ask you to start posting some of the future of subjects that you're thinking about. Future of work. This comes up a lot. Aging, very interesting. Longevity is a huge thing. Nutrition and wellness, absolutely. Education and learning. Storytelling about storytelling is pretty wild. Future of poverty and abundance, really. I just talked to people about this human connection thing. I think it's huge. As we become more digital, right? What's going to happen? AR, VR is a huge subject. Azo O'Leary, global sustainability, probably closest, nearest, and dearest to my heart. Social business is excellent. Democracy, very relevant. We have medicine, societal effects of abundance, very interesting. Mental health. Energy, absolutely. have Meta with the future about future ideas. Climate change, thank you. AI, biodiversity. I'd love for you all, Dave, if you can take that into, agriculture, farming, you look at the history and then you look at the future. I believe that the way we're currently farming is not going to feed our population projections. Housing, thank you, Sasha. I think a lot more people are going to be mobile, and there's a lot of interesting scenarios for that. This is a great list, thank you all. Quantum computing, I just saw something very recently. Intel is developing quantum computing chips. I think it was just today I read a headline about that. So Intel's got a lot of experience in chips. So our computers hopefully will get faster, even sooner than we predicted. Transportation, drones, physical universities. Very cool. Let's keep this going. I love this start. What I'm going to do now, that you get the hang of it and you can see what others are doing, which is amazing. Right? These are the feature of, this is the frame that you're going to write your story about. When we leave today, I want to have some time for us to talk. But afterwards, keep these worksheets and work through the next 2 pages. The second page is the steep variables, and I explain those a little bit. Read the ones that we have there. We have a huge set, and we just kind of threw a few in there just as examples. But what I'd love you to do is take your subject matter, what you're reframing, and the second page behind that is blank. Write in the things that you believe are going to be true for 2030, or you want to be true, right? Environmentally, economically, politically. Create your own steep variables. You have time. When you complete that step, you go to characters. Again, we've provided you some to choose from, right? And these are some, we have another a huge set of these, and we showed some, but we like to stretch age. Right? There's someone who's near the hundreds, there's younger. You can see some of the attributes that we've assigned to some of these people. Right? There's biomechanics involved. So maybe you can do 2 things. Pick one of them, and then use that as a starting point, and go to the next page and really build out that character. Right? Go into your storytelling mode and create a character that you want to read about, a character that you want to see in a movie. So complete that, step 3. And then we get to the story arc. World building, as we call it. It's a day in the life, a week in the life, a year in the life. You created a challenge. You framed up a challenge. You have these pillars of this future world, right? The society, the technology that you think will exist. And now you have a character. You have this character or characters. You have a hero. It could be the villain. Tell us that story. How do they overcome the challenge? How do they introduce the challenge to the world? I'm dropping this in here for us. Sometimes it's very helpful to learn from the best. Pixar, if you've seen any of their movies or all of their movies, they're all the same in terms of structure. Once upon a time, there was X. Every day, something happened. One day, another thing happened. Because of that, this happened. Because of that, that happened, until finally, Dory meets the other fish, and everyone's happy. But you take that, you translate that to every Pixar story, and they're great stories. I love them all. It's a good structure. I imagine, I can see some of the profiles, that you are great storytellers and story writers. So use this if you need it. If you don't, then you're probably writing the story in your head already. And here's where we're going to go to step 5. And this is where, I don't know why exactly or how it works, but when you go through this process, you tell this story about this challenge being overcome, concepts tend to fall out of it, right? Pick some of those ideas. How does this character achieve this goal? Well, there's probably technology involved. There's some society, something that happened, a device or a service or a platform or something of a concept that existed in that future world that you created, and now it's time to pull it out. It's going to be more than one. But for the purposes, just find that big one, start with that, and you'll start to see others that fall. Print this page out a few times, just in case, and sketch on it, write it down, put stickies, and do it a lot. And our ask is share with us, send us some ideas, because what we'd love to do, as Sveta said, we're gonna get some of these ideas back, and I think they're gonna be ideas that should be out in the world and should change the world. And if that's the case, we want to help Retrocast. We have some resources that can help you think through. You want this idea to exist in 2030? Well, let's step back. Let's figure out what we can start doing in 2018 to get there. So with that, I'll ask Sveta to come back, and we can start some questions, answers, thoughts, and provocations.
Watching everyone's future of ideas was awesome. I mean, I feel like I've heard a lot of this stuff before, but as I was reading through, how to control weather, cancer vaccines, all of these ideas, I was just like, yes. So that's awesome. So we have some questions. I wanted to just take a minute and ask you, can you share maybe a story of like a specific character and a specific concept that came out of one of the workshops that you've done that might help kind of solidify these ideas in people's minds before they go and start working on their own concepts?
Yes, absolutely. We had done a workshop on the home. We had nonprofits there, we had corporates, and a lot of technology experts. And one of the stories that came out of that was this character called Rhoda. Rhoda was 101 in 2030. That puts her, in her late 80s now. But Rhoda was living nomadically. So many things happening with the inability to retire and have a job. So she needed to basically find her purpose for living longer. I know someone's tracking on longevity, and if there's no jobs, like, what is your role on the earth if you're going to live longer? And she was questioning that in her story. She traveled the world and found that one of the biggest opportunities for her to add value to the planet was to share stories of the world, was historically and currently. So she nomadically traveled all over the place, gathering stories of life and essentially uploading those things, the visual of everything about that story, the context of what's happening, to this huge neural net. Right, that was one of our bigger ideas. This is massive neural net that everyone contributes to, so that there's this documentation of history for the next generation. And of course, because she was being very mobile, we had this cool motorcycle type of thing and exoskeletons that kept her healthy. Her job was to gather a microbiome from people, and then create foods best for their bodies. And that was her kind of like traveling job. It's like the food truck of the future, right? And she would do this, and it would be healthy, and she'd create these potions for people and sell them around the places she was going. She had security systems, a super powerful little battery. It was like the one in Terminator that she could plug in to power her suit. Because still in the future, there was someone who mugged her, and then she had to, go save herself from that. And she went on. She was in India, and then she was virtual reality and all these things, kind of connecting with her grandchildren. Love Rhoda. She's a great story. And actually, if you guys ask Sveta, we could probably get some of those stories out to you and others, because that's some of the stuff that we've created, and we're waiting for audiences for that content. But I can go on forever because we created a bunch of stories, but I love Rhoda. She was just one of my favorite characters.
Awesome. Cool. I hope that's helpful to people. So there's some really good kind of tough questions coming up, which I love. So Francis is asking, what ensures that we are heading towards a sci-fi utopia versus the sci-fi dystopias that are popularized by so many movies?
Thank you, Francis, because that's something I maybe forgot to address, but feel free to write the dystopian future, right? Those are things that are provocations. They make us have the conversation. this isn't necessarily all about the ideas. This is about the conversation that you can have with people. Sometimes people do take it to a dystopian future, but it's for a point, right? And if you believe that that's going to be the case, write that story because it's important, right? It's important. We, at SU at least, we believe that humans will prevail in this whole new world, right? We believe that the good is going to beat the evil, and those are the stories that we write, and that optimism is inspiring and keeps us moving forward. But I am not devaluing these dystopian futures, because those stories help me. They actually motivate me a lot, right? Those motivate me to go solve that challenge. We don't know what's going to happen in the future, but when we write stories, it helps inspire ourselves and others.
Yeah, it's really an interesting thing to think about, because there are so many more dystopian future visions that we're exposed to than utopian future visions. But I would agree with you. I think that both actually have a purpose, and the dystopian ones, I think the purpose is to scare us out of creating that future. So there's another question that came in that's kind of related. So I want to, where did that question go? Oh, here we go. I think it's, how can we use, how can science fiction help the next generation be more human, to treat each other with more respect? And I think while there's something in the question about kind of treading the line between reality, alternate reality, and virtual reality, maybe that's kind of how we envision those, how we consume that science fiction. I'm not sure.
It is an interesting question. I'm wondering, there's some assumptions on that the next generation is not more human. But that might come to the face-to-face. And I've had this conversation. I was working with a big company this morning, simply about that. How are we going to do that at scale? Get back to the face-to-face, right? I think if we look at the past, and I looked at we shared some stories that inspired me and probably others through Star Trek, right? They can change the way you approach your world on a daily basis. If you get to that, storytelling can do this. We know that, right? That's how we learn. If you can do that, then you're going to inspire people. I don't know what generation they are, but you can inspire people to change those little daily habits and maybe smile as they walk past that person versus down at the screen. We work heavily in AR and VR, and if we're talking about that path of your question, I'm very concerned. Right? There's AR videos that are just, this could be the worst world that I don't want to live in because I'm just getting bombarded by ads, right? That's a very real possibility. So I think it all comes down to, once again, if we believe that people designing and developing this stuff yourselves have the right intentions in mind, then we'll probably be able to get there. But my colleague, and I think you've heard from her hopefully before, Jody Medich, she talks about this technology superhumaning us, right? Making us superhumans through technology. And she has a lot of strong opinions on that. We hang out all the time. So she believes that it's just going to make us better people and more human. So we'll see.
One of the questions here from Miguel is, in your experience, what has been the reception of this method within corporate context? So I guess there's, probably a lot of people in the audience today that are working in large corporations, and in terms of thinking about bringing this kind of design exercise into that context, can you talk a little bit about your work with large corporations and doing this kind of design process? Absolutely.
Thank you. If you believe that there are people, not corporations, there's people who work at corporations, then that's a good starting point. And I do. I meet these people, I've worked with them all my life. And you believe that everyone's looking for new ways to solve business or environmental or whatever challenges. Generally, they're business challenges, right? We work in a context of a better world for better business. So when you get those people together, they're looking for new ways to achieve those goals. I would say at large, the large percentage of the workshops we do in this are with corporate teams. And you get the right people, the right mix, working together to create these stories. It tends to really galvanize them, right? They create new initiatives. That's the reason we do this. We like to entertain and we love to tell stories, but our real goal is to drive this with large corporations because we need them to change the world for better. We need that impact, that scalable impact. And what falls out are these concept sheets that are things that me and team, after every workshop, we test ourselves. Would we be proud of that concept getting to the world at scale coming out of this room? And we say yes. It's just, it works out well. I think the impact is embedded in the storytelling, embedded in the work we do. And companies love it because they're always looking for new methods, right? Looking for new methodologies, doing it together. And we get CEOs all the way to project managers to technologists. When they do this collaboratively, they have something to work around. And they go home and they try to make it happen. So I think it's resonated best with the large companies. We do it with startups. And sometimes they're like, I need a code today, so it's going to be, this is almost a distraction. We've done it with the United Nations. And they function basically like a corporation. So I think it translates to large groups, large enterprise organizations very well so far.
Awesome. That's great to hear. So we're pretty close to out of time. I'm going to ask one last question that I've saved for the end because I really like this question and I'm excited to hear your answer. So Houston asks, how do you fight cognitive bias so you can be open to all avenues of the future?
Oh, it's a good one. That is tough. I think the things we try to do is again, when you're working together, we've done, I think a good example of this is you could imagine a lot of people from the same organization kind of focusing and being biased towards their revenue model or their core competencies or whatever you call it, right? That happens, we have to do things to mix it up. Where it's really interesting and what I love is when we get people from completely different organizations. You get someone from a nonprofit, you get a corporate who has nothing to do with this other corporate, you put them together, it forces them to come to that first step, the future of. They get to a future of that is of interest to all of them, which starts to remove a lot of that bias, where they're leveling up to something that's bigger than any one organization. So that's kind of a strategy, right? You get people with different perspectives to collaborate on a single story, and some of that thing, a lot of that kind of goes away. When you have people with that focus and that bias, well, when I talk to you guys about, you don't create personas, you create a character. You have to stretch. This is a stretching exercise. Stretch your brain, stretch your mentality, question each other, to try to remove some of those biases. But I think it's a great question because it's something we address all the time. And you do it through the people, and you do it through some of the inspiration that you can throw in the room. When we get our experts, we bring science fiction writers, we'll bring comic book artists, and that tends to take you out, especially comic book artists, they can really take it into wild places. And that's where we like to go. So we'll bring it back later, right? We bring it back in the retrocasting, bring it back when you go back to headquarters. But like, let's stretch it out and get a little wild for a while, and right, get the right people in the room.
Yep. Yeah, I think the idea of bringing diverse perspectives together is a very good way to kind of snap you out of your own biases. Okay, so we're out of time now. Robert, thank you so much. I hope everyone enjoyed the session. It's definitely a little bit more interactive than what we've done in the past. Please download the worksheets if you like this design process and you want to try it yourself. When you click on the link, you'll see instructions of how to email us your finished worksheets if you'd like to do that. Like I mentioned earlier, we will bring Robert back for another session and we'll choose some of your concepts and have Robert work with you specifically to kind of do the retrocasting portion of this exercise. I'm really excited to see how that turns out. So please send us your ideas. AC has also posted some links in the chat section. If you guys like this session, if you have suggestions for future sessions, please take our survey. It really helps us get a gauge on how we're doing, and we're always trying to improve. So click on that link. If you're interested in longer, more advanced sessions, like this one, actually, please request an invite for Experts on Air Premium. That's another one of the links that you'll see there. This is kind of what we're gearing up to do more of. And if you haven't had a chance to participate in one of SU's in-person programs yet, you might be interested in our program called Resolve Learning. This is a 3-day in-person program that brings together leaders from around the world to come to Silicon Valley to explore, ideate, and design solutions to the global grand challenge of learning using some of our breakthrough methodologies. So click on that link that AC shared there. And of course, join us next week. We have our guest, also another Robert Mugga next week. He will be talking about redesigning our cities to shift us from fragility to resilience. That's another session I'm really looking forward to. So with that, I think we're all about done here. Thank you, Robert, so much. This was really fun, and we'll have you back soon. Thanks, everyone.